price variations and lots of improvements and lots of change. So don't be shocked on that. That's actually good. And we want a lot of choices and a lot of materials. And of course, there's going to be a lot of flexibility in costs for the moment, but it's going to be worth it.
And one thing, folks, I just realized I didn't mention at the beginning, and I apologize for that, is we're going to be recording this session. So if you're don't want to be on camera for a recording, feel free to turn your camera off, or if you want to just ask a question through the chat, that way you can do that, which I'm pulling these questions out. So apologies for not mentioning that sooner. One of the other questions that's come up here is DC has an active market for SRECs via RPS standards. Are there any incentives for batteries, especially on the operating side?
I can start and just speak to that, to our experience. It really depends on the state. So the main incentive is that you can get the federal tax credit. In this case, it's 26%, and it steps down to 22% for battery storage for residential options on your investment. And then where I base out of here in Richmond, in Virginia, there are no state level tax incentives or credits. But in Maryland, I think there's $1,000 credit. It really just depends on your state and where you operate.
Are you seeing any incentives that are applicable for storage that are more appropriate for the larger scale projects that are not available for residential?
Well, we're seeing, this is Scott. I mean, we have some initiatives. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission did it for a new rule for the grid to try to make it a little more easy to interconnect. We're seeing a lot of regulatory support in the different states for interconnecting or interfacing with the grid on these bigger projects. I actually have more problems on the building code side than I do, not for residential, but on bigger buildings than I do on the grid side. So that's just so again, it's because it's an adolescent industry, and we're just working out the kinks.
Yeah, and we certainly see that in solar as well. Go ahead, Aaron.
And Corey, on a higher level, I would also that you can get some incentives or some value streams for adding into the PJM or to the RTO market for voltage and ancillary services. So that's a technical way of saying for larger scale commercial batteries or larger scale, you can get some incentives. Now that just depends on where you're operating as well.
And RTO is what?
Regional Transmission Organization. In this case, it's PJM, and they're kind of like the big wholesale energy market controller that operates across states.
I've got a question from Bill here, which I think speaks to some of the expansion here. I have a grid-tied system with Enphase microinverters. Can I add batteries easily? And do they have them they have to be from Enphase?
Good question. I can start maybe on that. So if it's an Enphase microinverter system, yes, you can add batteries. It has to be an AC coupled system because it's the output of the inverters or the microinverters is coming in AC. And it just depends on the batteries. It doesn't have to be a specific Enphase battery system. It could be a Zonin, a lithium ion, or a Powerwall. You would just have to make sure that your battery is capable of being AC coupled, or your system is. Scott?
Oh, it's fine. Exact right answer. Aaron, you're good,
I had an interesting one here that sort of, I guess, overlap with EV, which is why are the Tesla car batteries significantly less than the Powerwall battery in terms of dollars per kilowatt hour? And are there any differences in those technologies within one company?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I don't have any exact analysis on that. I would assume they use similar technologies, and I think also you are seeing what is fueling residential storage options are all of the things that are happening, all of the advancements in the automobile sector, the electrification. I can't speak to any of the specific cost benefit differences between the residential offering or the EV battery, but I assume they're mutually beneficial as far as the technologies they use.
Yeah, if I can add to that, what Tesla or Elon Musk has done is why he got into both the building battery market and the utility scale battery market is he wants to produce batteries at scale, and the electric vehicle market is only one small piece of that. So he's building market niches. It's brilliant, but it's the same battery material, just in different form factors. The costs, though, do vary a little bit, but if you're already getting an electric car, obviously, then you can figure out how to maximize that with your kind of system. But I'm still a big believer in a dedicated system tied, as Aaron said, to a sub-circuit breaker panel and running your critical functions in your building. When I started in my home, when we had a lot of outages here in Arlington, Virginia, I ran my sump pumps, my refrigerator, my electronic ignition on my gas stove, a couple of lights, 2 sockets, and a small TV set. So I had food, I had entertainment, I had communications, of course, Wi-Fi. Life was good. And then you can add to that, as which I did, sadly, or because you get opiated on all this stuff, to the whole house. But you don't have to do it. It's far more cost effective to pick your critical loads and dedicate the battery bank to those critical loads.
Maybe on that same topic, Aaron, can you talk a little bit just from the consumer's perspective, if they're looking at storage, like what does that process look like as far as picking loads and critical load subpanel, and how does that translate into like what people end up with when they're shopping for storage?
Yeah, great question. So you think of loads as anything that consumes electricity, right? It could be a refrigerator, lighting, computer. Think of your critical loads or what consume electricity and are vital to functioning. So think of what you need in an outage. Obviously, lighting, refrigeration, keeping you cool or warm in the winter. So your critical loads are what you need to basically function. It's not going to be all of your home circuit. So a good exercise is really looking around your house and thinking, what am I going to need when there is a grid outage? The second thing to think of also on that topic is how long do I need to power it for? There's a difference between powering something for 1 or 2 hours or having it out for 2 or 3 days. So again, think of things that you need if you're on medical equipment, refrigeration, beer refrigerator. That's a joke, but that is things that are important to you that you definitely need to function.
Super. I've got another question here. This one's kind of an interesting one. I think it's for Scott from Dwight. Hey, Dwight. I think I met Dwight a long time ago in our Maryland program when I was program director there a couple years ago. Thanks for joining. Scott, Dwight's asking about ultracapacitors and whether they're going to be available for energy storage in the foreseeable future. Maybe you could just take a minute to explain what an ultracapacitor is and how it might be used similarly to batteries.
Ultracapacitors and supercapacitors are solid state storage. They're generally fast charge up and fast release of power. We use them in watches, by the way. If you have a solar watch, it probably has an ultracapacitor in it. There are some buses around the world that use ultracapacitors to run the electric bus, and every 2 stops they charge up for 5 or 10 minutes, and they can go another 2 to 3 stops. And we're going to see more and more of them integrated in transportation and ultimately in buildings. I think they're going to be hybridized with battery banks so that you get an initial fast power out, and then the battery takes over, and of course then it's immediately charging up, ready for the next piece of work. And we're going to have a lot of hybrid electric storage technologies, no question. Again, we're still in the early stages in this. I'm doing some of that kind of work with the U.S. military right now on this, but I think it's going to be another few years yet before we see small incorporations in residential and commercial building battery banks, but we will, and because they actually serve a very unique function.
Thank you. I'm learning stuff here too. I've heard the term before, but I don't know that I'd ever spent a lot of time learning about it, so that's great. Aaron, I think I've got 2 here that sort of are combined, which is from 2 different people, but I'm going to put them together, which is how much do batteries cost over sort of general range and general types? And then for people who are sort of uninitiated in storage, can you speak a little bit about what their options are and maybe ones you think are good or the best fit for residential?
Yeah, so the battery cost is really going to depend on what you're powering. What we've seen in our work in Mid-Atlantic, expect anywhere from between about $10,000 to $14,000 for a lithium ion option. Now, those costs are really going to depend on the type of battery itself, and then what type of site you have, as far as they're going to need to wire a specific sub panel. They're going to need to do some considerable work. Now, 10 to 14,000 is kind of a base range. You may be able to get into some small lead acid batteries that have a lower initial cost, depending on what your usage are, but have typically a higher operating cost. So, it's a politician's answer, but it really depends. But the 10 to 14,000 is what we typically see at this point. And then, Corey, I'm sorry, your second question?
Oh, just which technologies or which options you think are a best fit for residential?
What we're seeing right now is really more switched to lithium ion, which is a lot of different chemistries, although some of the traditional lead acid, which you have AGM, which is absorbed glass mat or sealed batteries, they can be just as fine. I know that, Scott, you use them. It's just, it's a cost benefit analysis. With those lead acid batteries, you're going to have a little bit less robust technology and higher operating costs. To give you an example, lithium ion, you might get more than 10 years of use or unlimited or more cycles out of it. Whereas a lead acid battery, which may be cheaper to purchase, you might have only 5 to 7 years of use depending on it. So it really just depends. And I think one good thing to do is talk to your installer, really see what sort of options they recommend. Scott, you might have some insight as well.
I have slightly a different view than Aaron. First of all, lead acid incorporates lots of different technologies. What I generally use all over the world are absorbed glass matrix batteries, AGMs. They're sealed. You can get 10-year warranties. My last set in my home lasted 12 years. So if you have great charge controllers, you don't have to put any water or anything in them. They're just sealed like a lithium ion. It really depends on and of course, they're much lower cost than the initial purchase. It really depends what electric loads you have tied to the batteries. Lithium ion is a great battery in a car because you can pull a lot of electricity out fast. It recharges fast. In a lot of buildings, you don't have loads like that. You do for air conditioning systems if you have it on it. And I use it for, and elevators, very important to use lithium ion because they pull a lot of power out when they start up, as duct pumps do for air conditioning. But if you're doing your sub-circuits or stationary loads with not a lot of oomph, AGMs might be the ideal cost. Secondly, I'm seeing it depends how big your battery bank is. There are about 18 different systems on the market, complete systems that are ranging from $6,000 to about $15,000. So you can have a lower cost. And of course, if it's part of a solar system, you can use the investment tax credit for that as part of the system, the installed cost of the system. So that's some flexibility in it. Lastly, I'd say a third of the installers in this region have a lot of experience in batteries, and a third really don't. So it's important when you ask your installer to ask them what they've done. And some, even if they've done it, have only done one kind of battery bank or just tied to one system. So it's important to snoop around a little bit and see what's out there. But no, the last thing, just like anything else in our society, battery system companies want to sell battery systems. And during COVID, they're nervous. So a lot of them are willing to come down in cost if you make it easy. So don't be afraid to ask for less without being too crazy in this particular time frame, because it might save you a lot of money. So Aaron, sorry about that, but I had to It's my crazy view.
I like it. And I wanted to actually add on to a really good point that you made too, is that not every single solar installer has a lot of experience or specializes in batteries. There are some that really cut their teeth on it and others that maybe reluctantly do it. So that's one thing as a consumer, really look at the experience that your solar installer has, or if you're looking at different proposals, one that includes batteries, take a look at their experience, and there might be one with a lot more experience. And I would just add that, you know, battery storage system is a little bit more complex system. So there, you know, somebody with more experience is going to be able to walk you through that better. And if there's any issues, most likely service it in a more rapid way.
One question I missed from earlier, which maybe is for you, Aaron, which is, does having a battery drop your usage from your solar panels when they are together?
I'm not sure if I understand that question.
So in other words, if you have batteries, will you use less of your solar energy, I think is the question. Maybe it's an efficiency question, I guess.
Maybe the one thing is speaking to efficiency, and it might revolve around solar, is what's called round trip efficiency. So every time, the second law of thermodynamics is every time you switch or convert one form of energy to another, you lose some. So, you know, the amount of energy that you feed in from solar, if it's converted, depending on the different types of conversion losses, you're going to probably have to size your system a little bit more robustly to take care of those efficiency losses. And depending on the technology, it could be anywhere from 80 to 85% all the way to 95% is what you would get in. So, you know, just in terms of the efficiency, you know, look at the round trip. Some of the lithium ion options have a 95% round trip efficiency, meaning that you only lose 5%. So I hope that is a...
Well, I might be able to look at it a different way. If you're charging your batteries directly from the solar panels, DC to DC, you're going to have a far more robust, clean system. If you're using microinverters, of course, you're going from DC to AC, and then back into the batteries. You have to reverse it to DC again, and you're going to lose, depending on whose inverters and the technologies, from 6% to 15%. So generally, if you're starting fresh, you want to have DC to DC into your batteries, and you're going to have a lot less losses. But again, what's wonderful about batteries is I can use it when it's cloudy, the solar electricity, or when it's at nighttime, because I hate to break it to everybody, but solar doesn't work much in the nighttime. Unless Aaron, you want to set up Virginia moon in addition to Virginia sun, but that's a different thing. So batteries give you a lot more flexibility on your electricity. And of course, you don't have to wait around for net metering rules from your utility company.
Scott, I wanted to clarify terminology. That was a really good point. So when you say DC to DC, that would be a DC coupled system. Is that correct?
Yes, you have and that's how my both systems work on my buildings. On my office building, I have both a wind turbine, a solar photovoltaics, and believe it or not, a hydrogen fuel cell, all producing DC electricity, all going directly through charge controllers, again, which optimally charge your batteries and make sure they don't overcharge into the battery bank. So it's all three DC to DC. My home, same thing. Photovoltaics into a DC battery. So I don't have I'm not switching current back and forth from DC to AC, which is electricity loss. So you want to think that through a little bit. But again, it still makes sense in your particular situation, even if you have microinverters, because you're getting a more robust output. It still may work out. You just have to think it through a little more carefully. That's all.
Got a good question, I think maybe that plays off of that on the AC side, which is from John Howard asking about the new Enphase Ensemble system. So his question is, new Enphase inverters are supposed to be able to charge batteries even when the grid is out. How does that work? So this is for microinverters being able to interact with an AC coupled system, specifically the Enphase one. Can either one of you describe a little bit more about what's going on there?
Scott, do you want to take a shot at that? Or I can...
I'm Aaron. Go for it, Aaron.
Okay. So, well, first, the Enphase Ensemble system. I know it's a modular system. It starts with some smaller blocks, but my understanding is that even when the grid is out, it can still charge the batteries for later. And that would be an AC coupled system. And then I believe also there's some functionality for grid support functions. I believe it's advanced. I don't have a lot of experience with that. The one thing with the Enphase Ensemble is I haven't seen it deployed. I don't know if you have, Scott. My understanding is that it's still in the process of being deployed.
Right.
So I don't have a lot of experience. And that's also one thing you might want to look at is with batteries, you want to see some field testing. There's a difference between something that looks good in a in a shiny, piece of outreach material or something that's been tested. So I don't have a lot of specific experience with that, but, maybe punt it over to you, Scott.
Well, first of all, that was great, Aaron. I think you're 100% right. It's a new thing that they're projecting out. I've seen some installations, but I haven't gotten a real data yet. And as I do, again, I'm not tied to any manufacturer technology, but it's I want to see a year or two after installation, feedback from customers and how they feel it works. And of course, the more it's instrumented, the more I can go on independently and look at how it's behaving. So I don't have enough information for you yet on that, and it will be very interesting. But the good news is we have a lot of that innovation coming into the market, so we're going to see more and more synergies on technologies and approaches. So I'm excited about that.
So more generically, I think for your question, John, about the Enphase, not specifically to them, which is that any AC coupled system, when you have solar producing here and converting the energy to AC, and you have a storage system that is also converting its DC power to AC, they sort of meet in the middle with your main electric panel. But when there's no grid, the amount of energy that's in your home has to be balanced at all times with load and production, either from the batteries or from solar. So if those systems are not aware of each other, the inverter that controls the battery has to fake being able to make sure it doesn't overcharge. But an Enphase system, SMA also has this technology. They're actually communicating, the modules with the microinverters are communicating with the storage array so that the modules are not overproducing electricity during the daytime. So it's essentially saying like, hey, slow down, don't give me so much, or give me more because I need more, so that process is a little bit more smooth than just having it do a very rough version of that, which is, well, it's a little too much detail, but it adjusts the frequency of the electric signal to shut off the panels and then turn them back on again. So the short answer is Enphase does those communications, and there's other ones that do that. And there's a lot of good stuff coming out on the market that has similar levels of communication.
And Corey, just to add to that, though, there are a lot of smart charge controllers that have different aspects of that.
Yep.
So I have these Outback ones that are web enabled. I can look at, but they normally do the exact same thing of deciding how much is allowed in the battery and meter it out or halt it actually, so your batteries don't overcharge. So there are other kinds of technologies in this game as well. That's all I want to say.
Yeah. And Scott, you do a lot of projects that are sort of all over the world in strange conditions. How important
Yes.
is it for climate control for batteries? And it doesn't matter by technology.
Oh, it matters big time with technology, and that's the other issue. Why I use AGMs a lot is that they can go these sealed lead acid batteries, and glass matrix means they actually have glass webbing inside to keep the gel from separating. And you can, of course, roll them down mountains and they don't have any damage. I've done that by mistake, but they go 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit to 150 degrees above zero. And I have a lot of projects in the Southwest United States where it's 120 degrees. I don't need to air condition those damn batteries. That's what's important. So with lithium ion, and particularly in most building codes in the United States, I got to air condition them. I got to make sure there's good airflow, air exchange with them. I have to have fire, smoke, and heat detectors. I have to have water within a certain number of feet from the batteries. And in some cases have to have a cellular connection if it's not a residential building, but a mixed residential building or mixed use buildings. I have to have the fire stuff, smoke and heat go right to the local fire department so they can respond immediately. So that's all important. Even with my system, by the way, I want to point out, when I had it installed in both buildings, different times, I brought over the local fire guys. I showed them where I have a main switch which detaches the batteries from the building. So if I have a fire even not related to the batteries, they walk immediately to that, turn it off, so they're shut the power from the battery banks, so they know they don't have hot wires to deal with as they're going into the building, dealing with a fire or a flood or whatever. So having someone who understands those code issues are very important. But the original question here, yes, different batteries have different requirements and add different kinds of costs, and you have to be very aware of that.
Yeah, and I would just really quickly add that just as a general rule of thumb, batteries, no matter what technology you like to operate in, relatively comfortable operating temperatures, anywhere between about 50 degrees Fahrenheit to probably 80 or 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So they're a little bit more temperamental according to temperature. So if we're comfortable, typically without wearing a sweater or, having to adjust to the elements, the battery is going to function better. High heat is not going to be, or extreme cold is not going to be comfortable for those batteries. And that's why when you're installing in a home, you're typically going to want to use a conditioned space, a place where there's some sort of HVAC system that keeps the temperatures comfortable.
While we're on the topic of different chemistries, I've got a couple of questions here about sort of the next biggest thing. One question about mass storage with liquid metal batteries. Another one is asking about zinc technologies. Scott, maybe can you just talk a little bit about sort of what you think is the next thing that's going to come?
Yeah, well, we have lithium phosphate batteries. We have zinc batteries of all types: lead zinc, lithium zinc, phosphate zinc. I've seen a nickel zinc combination I'm working with. I've seen carbon supercapacitor batteries. I have in a demo van here I bring to universities. We have a lot of different technologies, and they all have different assets to them. And some of it's form factor. You can make them flat up against the wall, or some have take temperatures better, or some take different loads better. Some charge faster, some discharge faster. So I expect in the future that actually we won't have systems that are unitary batteries types. We will have a smart microprocessor with a box full of different smart batteries, and the microprocessor will select which batteries to use for which load condition you happen to have. Where that battery bank is sited. But we're a long way from there now, though we have some tests going on. But yes, I am telling you, the batteries we have today will not be the same batteries we have 5 and definitely 10 years from now. No question about it. And that's good. I also want to point out that that's no reason you should not get a battery system. I mean, I told people, I bought some of the earliest laptops and cell phones, and I knew my original cell phone was the size of a wine bottle, and I knew it was going to miniaturize, though no one believed me at the time when we had only 3 cell towers in Washington, D.C. But technology normally changes it. You still need early adopters to build the markets, and that's what we're doing now.
Thank you. And we've certainly seen that trajectory with solar, right? There are a lot of early adopters, years ago, and now we've long passed that, and it's, universal adoption. So it's a common arc. We've got a question here, I think more on the sort of integrating batteries with other backup technologies like generators. And I'm wondering, this particular question is sort of, is it possible? How does it work when you have solar and batteries and a generator on site?
Well, that's great. I did this because I was paid to do it, but I have a natural gas generator at my house, and they wanted to know, I had 2 different clients on that. If you had long periods of clouds, mostly in this area that in Arlington, it's during the summer only, and it's with tropical storms where you can have very thick cloud cover in the summer where you do have air conditioning for a week or 2. and therefore you do not have solar charging your battery banks. This is going on in California right now with the forest fire smoke, for instance. And so I have it set up, and it has worked where if the batteries fall below 40% state of charge, um, the natural gas generator pops on and charges the batteries up for an hour. And I mean, it's now, by the way, it's only worked. I've only had it doing it. It only happens in the summertime, and it happens every fourth year. But and actually, that's what my fuel cell does behind my office building. Exact same thing as a natural gas generator, except it's hydrogen, which only has water as its emission. But yes, you can integrate, microgrids do this all the time, integrate storage, solar, batteries, small wind, and a whole bunch of other renewables in the system. There are different protocols how you interface with that. And there are about 4 or 5 inverters that do a good job in handling that, but most inverters do not.
And I would just add, here in Virginia, I've seen a couple systems that were done by preppers, people that really are looking at the long-term resiliency. And I've seen a couple systems with battery storage coupled with a gas or a propane generator. So I think the take home is that they play well, they just play a little bit separately together, and you can combine them as one backup solution.
I want to switch gears a little bit here because we've got a couple questions about, I think, solar penetration and the way batteries happen. So this question is from Lee Peters. I've heard some experts that the grid cannot sometimes handle high input on long sunny days, and the energy companies need to call on large users to up their usage to avoid overload of the grid. If solar users installed battery storage, would that help with this problem?
Well, that's a great, Aaron, you go first.
Yeah, I think that's a bigger picture thing. So I think specifically to that, in places where there's high penetration of solar, I think California is a good example, is that there might be more exports to the grid during certain times of the day. And again, the take-home message is that absolutely, battery storage is a great way to condition or to, I guess, integrate high penetrations of solar PV, because you could use the battery to store energy when it's most abundant and maybe not needed, or if it's a high amount of load on a distribution circuit, for example. So absolutely. And then, secondly, what we're starting to see is utilities getting out in front of that with time of use or time varying rates that actually assign a value to energy that is consumed during peak demand, and a higher value or a higher cost as opposed to energy that is consumed during lower peak demand. So batteries plays very, very well, I think, not only in residential, but also in commercial settings. So Scott, I'm sure you have some things to add.
Well, just that Hawaii actually is the best example. They have so much solar in the Hawaiian Islands that they were getting a situation where when the sun started coming up, they got distribution line congestion and couldn't move electrons, and they were getting flickering on the grid. So then they basically postponed the right to net meter, and of course everybody in Hawaii went nuts. And instead of getting stringed up and die as being part of the utility, they negotiate with the utility commission for if you want to hook up new solar, you had to get battery banks, and there are some incentives to do that. Actually allows the utilities to draw out, but then they can instruct you can drop your solar in your batteries. So at 10 a.m. when you're really starting to pump, you're holding back, and you can meter it out during the day when they have more throughput from the distribution lines. So is that going to happen with solar and wind? Yes. And do we have technologies and approaches to handle it? Yes. And is it going to provide more resiliency, reliability, and lower costs to ratepayers? Yes. But we're starting, it takes time to work all that out.
Great, thank you. I want to make sure we get to as many of these as possible. We've got a few more minutes here, but happy to stick on a little bit more. I don't know, Scott and Aaron, if you're able to do that. but let's keep going. And we actually still have people coming in, so that's great. One thing that we've seen a number of questions here about incentives, right? Both local incentives and as well as federal incentives. Can you maybe, Aaron, first talk a little bit about sort of what's relevant when somebody's trying to use the solar tax credit, for example, along with storage, and what do some of the state incentives look like? Any particular states that stand out? I know you mentioned Maryland earlier, but your thoughts on that?
Yeah. The main incentive is going to be the federal investment tax credit. So my understanding is that for residential, if you have a battery backup coupled with solar, you can get that full 26%, or next year as it steps down to 22%. With commercial systems, you have to prove that 75% of your battery is at least 75% of your battery is charged by solar. So that's really the main incentive right now. I know that in Maryland, there's that $1,000 storage credit that was based on RGGI funds, and it really is state specific. One thing that we're looking at Solar United Neighbors is to get some more robust incentives on the state level. In Virginia, there is none. But as Scott spoke of, the value of battery storage is stacked. Not only do you have resiliency benefits, but you have grid benefits. So there's certainly incentives that should happen. But as far as the states that we work in or that I'm familiar with, it really just depends on which state specifically, if you're looking for an incentive outside the federal tax credit. Corey, you're on mute.
What I get for coughing and then not unmuting myself. What about you for used equipment, like let's say an EV battery that is from a Volt or something, where you're using it second market? Does that also qualify for a credit?
That is a good question. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that in use to actually judge a criteria. Scott, I don't know if you've seen somebody that's used a used EV
I've never
battery.
seen anybody claim that as part of the tax credit. I do try to talk people out of it, actually, because obviously a new battery is much more predictable than one that's been used. And remember, a vehicle battery has had a lot more profound drawdowns and tension than a stationary battery has. But I actually do believe in principle, we want to, batteries after used in electric vehicles, we want a secondary life for it. Utility companies are using it for frequency control to address the surges and sags in the grid. And that's a great market for the batteries. Theoretically, it could be also done in buildings, but it has to be with a smart customer. So I think it's a good thing. Over time, yes, with a knowledgeable consumer. But if you're starting out, I would say buy new.
While we're talking about new, any opinions, either one of you, on the best warranties out there? This is from Taylor for new batteries, lithium ion or otherwise. Like who's got the best warranty coverage?
I see Tesla, Zonin, they're typically 10,000 cycles. I believe the new Generac, which is just basically a Pika battery, they repurposed the Pika battery, also has a good one. Zonin, if I'm not mistaken, has a really good depth of discharge, all the way to 95% or more, I believe. But those are some of the best ones I've seen. Scott, I don't know if you also have thoughts.
No, I think you're absolutely right on that. But I do have to say, you can, in some cases, depending on whose batteries, they do give you different warranties on the batteries. So you can, for a higher cost, get a better battery that's produced with some affectations to it. So when you're buying individual batteries rather than systems, and again, I'm a big believer now in buying systems, but if you want to buy the batteries, check on the websites. A lot of times you'll see that they offer, again, it will cost more, but they'll offer longer years and rougher treatment for a premium, and they'll give you a battery that's manufactured to meet that standard, of course.
Got some praise here for you, Scott, on your sustainable energy course, and a question from Karen, who's a AP environmental science teacher, whether you have any recommended texts or journal articles on battery storage that would be appropriate for
I
the class.
have PowerPoints I can share with you. I have probably 60 different reports. I have probably 200 articles within the last year and a half on batteries. I mean, I do tons of presentations on it. I am willing to share with any educator, frankly, almost any person, but educators come first. Absolutely. Aaron will or Corey will give out my email, and I saw on this, I see the chat thing. You were talking about, Aaron, you were talking about Sonnen batteries, right? SONNEN, correct? That's what
Yeah.
I was asking.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And I put our email address in the chat. We can sort of connect folks to you, Scott. info@solarunitedneighbors.org. Feel free to contact us if you're looking for materials from Scott. We can make that connection for you. All right, scroll back up here and see what I'm missing. Here's one, Aaron, I think do batteries make sense for load shifting, peak shaving if I switch to a time of use power plan like the new Dominion one in Virginia?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that really depending on your usage pattern, but that is a great way to get an additional value stream for your batteries. So most people will just have their batteries sit topped off and wait till there's a grid outage and then use it. With that time of use rate, which has variable pricing based on peak demand, you can actually put your battery to work while you're waiting for a grid outage. And what you can do is arbitrage, which is a fancy word for charging your battery when electricity is cheap and then discharging it to power your loads when energy is more expensive. Here in Virginia, our peak times, at least according to the time of use rate, are early in the mornings and then late afternoon. So what you could do is discharge your batteries during those peak times when energy is more expensive, and then charge your batteries when it's cheaper, and that can give you a value stream. So the answer is yes. The one caveat is it depends upon how much of your subloads that you have or your critical loads are powered by your batteries. Remember that not all of your loads are going to be powered by your batteries, so you just want to make sure that what you're powering is substantial enough to, what you're backed up with the battery is substantial enough to make a difference. But yes.
Thank you. So I think we're running out of time here, and I recognize we have a lot of questions people we couldn't get to, which is fabulous. I mean, the number of folks we've had on this webinar Ask Me Anything has really been great. We highly encourage you. I put the email address in the chat. If you have something you don't feel like we got to and when you want assistance with it, feel free to send that email question to info@solarunitedneighbors.org. We are always eager to help folks, and if we don't know the answer, we'll try to find somebody who does. I'm also going to put some information in the chat here to our storage guide. A couple of folks mentioned that they're somewhat new to this, and you will find a lot of background and definitions and sort of helpful information for consumers in that guide that'll bring you up to speed for a lot of these topics. So we recognize there is a kind of a wide variance in people's awareness and knowledge. And I've also put in a chat to a webinar that Aaron did a little while back, which is fabulous, that goes over a lot of that material as well. So feel free to ask there, contact us. I just want to remind people, if you have liked this event and you want to attend more, you can join us for other events at the Solar Congress, everything from how to advocate from your couch to community solar to buyback plans in Texas. We got a lot of great stuff. So thank you so much for joining today. We hope you enjoyed the session. We really appreciate, Scott, you taking the time with us today and sharing your expertise, and Aaron, you as well. And we just want to take a moment to let you know as well that we've got a lot of solar co-ops happening throughout the country too. If you want to learn more about our solar co-ops that often have battery storage in them, you can find them on our website at solarunitedneighbors.org/co-ops. So thanks again, and everybody have a great rest of your day. Have a wonderful weekend. If you got Monday off, enjoy your extra day. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you all, and thank you,
Thank-
Corey.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.